Well, my personal story, I'd say, actually begins here in Danbury long before I was born. My mother's family came to Danbury in the 1920s, just before the Great Depression. They had left New Bedford, Massachusetts, but she is of Italian and Lebanese descent. So my great-grandparents on my mother's side came from Italy, and on the other side came from Lebanon. And then my mother met my father while he was at school in Boston in the 60s. And myself and my twin sisters, a result of that marriage. And I was born in 1969, actually in Boston. We lived on the South Shore of Massachusetts, and then the entire family moved to Saudi Arabia in 1978. My father got a job with an oil company there, and we lived there on and off for the next several years until returning to the Danbury area in 1985. And that's sort of how the story began with my connection to Danbury. My mother's connection to Danbury runs very deep, and our family on my mother's side has lived here ever since the late 1920s. So beyond just the family connection, as you know, my family having lived here for many years and growing up here, my great-grandparents and grandparents worked in some connection with the hatting industry. My great-grandfather, who immigrated to this country from Lebanon through Brazil and Cuba, spoke Arabic, English, and Portuguese, and a bit of Spanish. But back in the 1920s and 30s, it was the Portuguese and English and Arabic that helped him, and he became a manager at one of the fur shops because there were so many Lebanese and Portuguese that worked there, and he was able to translate and to oversee on behalf of the owners. And I had other relatives that worked in the Yemen fur shop and hat factories in what was then River Street, known as Little Lebanon, over now, which is Kennedy Plaza and that area, where the original Lebanon American Club was founded over on New Street. It was a very large Lebanese American community there. So on my mother's side, we go very deep into deep connection in Danbury with the hatting industry, the fur industry. And then, as so many families did, they branched off into different things. My grandfather, Albert Taylor, owned different restaurants or diners in town. My grandmother, worked in various, factories and industries, including Grolier over the years in Danbury. And when we moved back here in 1985 from living in then Massachusetts and Saudi Arabia, I, went into high school, a sophomore year at Immaculate High School. And so, Danbury's where my home has been for decades, and, really enjoy the history here. I was always a history buff. So in high school, I loved history. I was a history major in college. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize when they're just walking those streets in Danbury, whether it's Main Street, Deer Hill, South Street, to think about how much history occurred here. The history of the hatting industry, the Revolutionary War history, the post-Revolutionary War, post-colonial history here in Danbury. It's very deep and broad, and our Danbury Historical Society Museum is a great place. I've learned a lot there, and I remember as a kid, even before I lived here, when we came in to visit relatives, going and touring the Ryder House, learning about Tyrion's raid on Danbury and the burning of Danbury, the Battle of Ridgefield, where Benedict Arnold, before he was a traitor, he was Washington's best combat field general. They fought the British, and while they didn't win, they showed the British that both Continentals and militia could stand up, and the British never invaded Connecticut after that Battle of Ridgefield. Putnam Park, and General Putnam's regiment that was there in the winter of 1779, known as Connecticut's Valley Forge. It wasn't as difficult as Valley Forge was, but it was a key component in hemming the British into New York City and Washington being able to bring the battle down to the southern states when Cornwallis invaded the South. And Danbury played a significant role in supplying that ring of troops that hemmed the British into New York City and the outer boroughs of New York. So it's an amazing history that we have here, and it continues on through the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and Hubble telescope parts made here in Danbury, and so much of the pharmaceutical and high-tech industry that relies on the productivity of Danbury. So I'm proud to consider myself a Danburian, even though I was born in Boston. But again, there's that colonial historic connection. And I learned so much growing up in Massachusetts and going to high school here in Danbury and living here since then. Absolutely local, just down the street from here at Western Connecticut State University. I have to say it was much smaller at the time when I went. I entered in 1988, graduated in 93, a semester late because I decided to take a few extra credits in an internship program. But I truly enjoyed Western Connecticut State University. Again, that history aspect, an amazing history department, which is still strong today, that taught us not only, the students, not only about national and international history and geopolitics, but also local history. We had a professor, Herb Janik, who was so well studied in local history and truly learned a lot. And he had us do oral history projects, not unlike this one. Now, we didn't video them as much. It was more recordings and taking notes and photographs. But again, it was trying to capture, he taught us that we need to capture history before it fades away, because so much is embedded in people's minds and in their memories, and they haven't put it, back then to paper, or now necessarily haven't put it to video or digital recording. So this is a great project, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
We appreciate having you here. So after WestCon, where did you obviously have a career?
Yes.
So where is this taking you? It's taking you to Danbury all the way up to, and beyond. So tell us a little bit more about that.
I mentioned that I took an internship, and I was lucky enough to do a legislative internship through a great program at Western Connecticut. And that led me to become involved at the local level. I was asked by a local councilman who was in one of my classes at WestCon to campaign with him. And that's how I got involved in sort of local politics and really understanding local Danbury. I took that legislative internship, which exposed me to the lawmaking process in Hartford at the state capitol, the General Assembly. And shortly thereafter, between working locally and volunteering in politics and that legislative internship, I was able to get a part-time position with the legislature. And it was amazing. I really didn't imagine when I was first entering WestCon, or even when I did the legislative internship, that then I would be working there and then get a full-time position with the legislature, while at the same time continuing to volunteer in Danbury on various boards and commissions. I volunteered and canvassed with local candidates, and it really, beyond the political aspect of it, what was so important was I met people going door to door, start to learn their stories, what was important in neighborhoods, what was important to neighborhoods and to communities and to different constituencies, and also could start to see the changing in Danbury in a positive way, new immigrants coming in and moving into old neighborhoods and rehabilitating them in the 90s and early 2000s. I was lucky enough, after working a few years at the legislature, to go to law school. I saw laws being made, and I wanted to understand more about how laws worked, how I could be part of that process, and to use the law to help people. That time there was Attorney General Richard Blumenthal, who then went on to become U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal now, and I saw what he was doing in his office with the law to help consumers, to help seniors, to advocate for those who didn't have an advocate or couldn't afford one, and I wanted to do something like that. I went to law school at Quinnipiac and stayed in Connecticut. And when I graduated in 1999, I had a great opportunity after taking the bar. During that time, I also ran for the city council. And I won a seat in 1999 on the Danbury City Council in the 4th Ward. It was a ward where I lived, where although my family, except me, didn't live there at the time, that's where my mother's family originally part of them had moved to back in the 1920s and 30s. So I was actually representing neighborhoods where my relatives, my great-grandparents, great-aunts and uncles, and great-great-aunts and uncles had lived on Triangle Street, Stone Street, Michael Street. And so it was really sort of, history coming back or repeating itself and being in that home ward again. So I served on the city council and was reelected after that, and at the same time was lucky enough to get a job at the office of the Attorney General and to work for Attorney General Blumenthal in consumer protection. And that sort of led me on to the next part of my career, but it was that base of understanding local politics and local issues, getting elected to the city council, and also having that law degree that I could then use in the realm of consumer protection and advocating for people, and enforcing the law on behalf of Connecticut consumers.
Right now.
So I'm currently the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs for the state of Connecticut. We have a healthcare center, a residential facility, family housing, veteran cemeteries, as well as offices with veterans who are advocates and represent veterans across the state of Connecticut when filing for claims and benefits with the federal government and also with state and municipal agencies. But how I got there, I'd take a step back actually to September 11th, 2001, which was the day of the terrible terrorist attacks on our nation. It was actually a primary election day, and I was out volunteering for someone. And I wanted to do something more than what I was doing. I was serving on the city council, I was practicing law for the state and advocating for consumers. I felt I was too old to enter the military. I was already in my early 30s to begin a career, but someone told me about direct commissioning. So after a few years of maneuvering through the maze of bureaucracy, I was lucky enough to be commissioned into the United States Army Reserve as a judge advocate, an Army lawyer, in 2005. And I've served in the Army Reserve since then. As of this recording, it's been about 13 and a half years that I've served in the military. And that gave me a background and a much better knowledge, obviously, of what veterans need and how to advocate for them. And I met, when I was on duty, a man named Sean Conley, Lieutenant Colonel. He eventually became Commissioner of Veterans Affairs and brought me on as his Chief of Staff and General Counsel. And then when he resigned to actually run for governor, although he was not successful in that, I became the acting commissioner, and then Governor Daniel Malloy nominated me, and the legislature confirmed me as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. And what's important to me about that story is you never know where you're going to end up. You also never know how you're going to get there. But my mother always taught me is, work well with those around you. You're going to meet the people, the people that you meet on the way up are the same people that you meet on the way down, or vice versa, whatever it may be. And you never know what the plan is for you. I've been very lucky and humbled to be in the position of Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. And I take my political experiences, my public policy experiences, my legal and my military experiences to apply that to advocate now for veterans and for their family members, and to try to improve the delivery of services, to improve our healthcare facility in Rocky Hill, to improve connectivity through the internet, and to update old means of doing everything by paper and trying to automate so that we can save money and reach out to more veterans, particularly a new generation who rely on their smartphones and aren't tethered to a PC or even a laptop, but now it's a tablet or a smartphone, and to reach out to them through mobile apps rather than saying you have to come in and file a piece of paper to get your benefits. I want to see more of that in the future from the standpoint of the state, and I think the state is moving that direction. And in Danbury, I've enjoyed over 10 terms now I've been on the city council. We've modernized downtown Danbury, took a new look at our Main Street and put more resources in because it had been going in the other direction. I think it's very important for people to look to the broader community to reach across both ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic lines to understand that we're all in this together. And despite differences in the past, that we all need to pull in the same direction. What's the old saying of, a rising tide lifts all ships or raises all ships? Well, that can happen here, and I think that can continue to happen in Danbury. We need to do it in a smart way by looking at housing and not over-constructing and overburdening our schools, and going forward being more conscious of that. I think also looking to continuing that partnership with WestCon and with local educational institutions like Naugatuck Valley Community College so that we have an educated and skilled workforce so that we can continue to try to expand high-tech, IT, and other industries in Danbury, but not forgetting the mom and pop industries, because there are many who began as mom and pop who became very large in Danbury, and that's because I think there were people here supporting them and not trying to squeeze out mom and pop just for the sake of big industry. Let's have everything. Let's have mom and pop, small business downtown, and try to get the larger industries in here. And Danbury is about a blend of industries, a blend of people, a blend of different restaurants, and a blend of religions, and all of that together. Even if we don't agree on everything, I think the one thing we can agree upon is we all want success, not for our sake, but for the next generation. That's what I hope to see.
Excellent. Anything that you want to end on?
Well, one thing I do want to end on is to thank my family. My extended family, my parents, Teresa Taylor and John Saadi, my grandparents, the Taylors, the Saadis, and the Arabic name for my grandparents on my mother's side from Lebanon were Atallahs. And that family, my extended family, my wife, Valerie Ventura Saadi, my children, Jacob and Sabrina, and my extended family through my in-laws. I couldn't do what I do today or have gotten to where I am without family, extended family, and my friends. I really rely on them and have relied on them, and I know that we all rely on each other, and that's not a bad thing.